Welcome back, you guys. Today we're making a cake that is inspired by one of my favorite New York treats, which is an Italian rainbow cookie. So these little treats are so amazing. I didn't actually know about them until I moved here to New York City, but I'm so happy I discovered them. So as you can see, they're not quite a rainbow. They're made with green, yellow, and kind of a pinkish red layer. But they are filled with raspberry jam, which makes them so delicious and adds such a nice pop of flavor. And the actual cookie layers themselves are made with almond paste. It's coated on both sides with chocolate normally, and usually there's a kind of a fun pattern that's carved into that. So I'm going to try to incorporate all of those components of the cookie right into our cake. So to do that, I'm going to be making cake layers that are the same color as the cookies. I'm also going to be filling the cake with some raspberry jam and of course some almond buttercream. To make the cake layers a little bit more dense and to help them resemble the texture of an Italian rainbow cookie, and I'm also going to be using whole milk instead of buttermilk. So as much as I love buttermilk, we don't want to compete with almond flavor in the cookies today, so we're going to let that really be the star of the show. To cover the outside of the cake, I'm going to use some chocolate ganache, which is going to be so delicious and it's really going to make it look just like the cookies. We're going to actually make the chocolate ganache first today because it needs a couple hours to set and firm up. So we'll get going on that right away and then we'll start working on the cake layers. To make my ganache, I'm going to be using 1.5 bags of chocolate chips. And to make sure that I measure this correctly, I'm going to put my bowl on my scale. It is 263 grams without any chocolate in it. And to my bowl, I'm adding 2 bags of mini chocolate chips. I'm choosing to use milk chocolate, which has a 3-to-1 weight ratio with heavy cream. That means however many grams of milk chocolate I use, I need to add 1/3 the amount of grams of heavy cream. That ends up actually being just about exactly 1 cup of heavy cream. So that's 2 bags of mini chocolate chips to 1 cup of heavy cream. Again though, you guys, the type of chocolate that you use, all of it can vary and throw off your ratio, so really be sure that you look at how much cocoa is in your chocolate to make sure that you're using the right ratio of heavy cream to chocolate. And that's the key to making successful ganache. So I heated my heavy cream on the stovetop just until it had barely begun to boil, and then I poured it over the chocolate chips in the bowl. I let this sit for about 2 minutes, and I then gave it a good stir until all the chocolate had melted. As you guys can see, our ganache now is super silky smooth. It looks just delicious. So this ganache is really a tease. I don't really recommend popping it in the fridge because you don't want it to get too cold too quickly. I really just like covering it with saran wrap directly over the top and letting it sit for a few hours. So now it's time for our almond cake layers. So just like always, I'm going to start with my dry ingredients in my bowl that I fitted with a paddle attachment. So I'm going to start with 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. Next, I'm adding in 2¼ cups of granulated sugar. For our leavening agents for this cake, I'm adding in 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And then I'm adding in 1/2 teaspoon of just regular table salt. I'm going to give this a little pulse just to get those mixed together. And then we're going to add in our butter. To my dry ingredients, I'm going to add 1½ sticks of butter. So this is just unsalted butter that's at room temperature. And I hate using 1/2 stick of butter because then you always have a leftover 1/2 stick, but that's the butter that I end up using on toast and things like that. Alright, so you guys can see it's definitely like crumbly in there, and that butter has been really evenly distributed throughout the dry ingredients. So for this recipe, like I mentioned, I'm using whole milk, and I'm going to be adding 1 cup of room temperature whole milk. So we'll add that right in there and give this a stir. So next I'm going to be adding 4 large eggs into my batter one at a time. These eggs are at room temperature, but if yours aren't or you didn't set them out far enough in advance, just place them in a bowl and fill it up with warm water. Let them sit for about 5 minutes and they'll be good to go. So we're going to add in our eggs one at a time, just mixing until it's combined. This batter is starting to look so velvety. Alright, so we've got all 4 of our eggs in there. We'll give that a quick stir and then we'll mix in our last ingredients. So our last 2 ingredients are just a little bit of oil. This just helps lighten up the batter a little bit and makes it a little bit richer. And then our last ingredient that I'm going to add is 2 teaspoons of almond extract. So we're going to mix this on a low speed. Alright, so our batter looks silky smooth. So now that our batter is all ready to go, give this one more quick stir, and then I'm going to divide this evenly between my pans. So again, you guys, I swear if you ever want to make sure anything is evenly distributed, use your kitchen scale. Just be sure that you note how much the bowl weighs before you add it so you can really tell. Green food coloring to make our cake layers look just like these little guys. I'm not using a ton of food coloring here because gel food coloring is already so concentrated, and a little bit is going to go a long ways. So we've got a nice yellow shade here. Next we'll color this batter green. for food coloring, you could use liquid food coloring if that's all you have on hand, but I really highly recommend using gel food coloring. It's just so much thicker and more concentrated. It definitely will never throw off the consistency of your batter, whereas if you add a ton of liquid food coloring, it can. So you just want to watch out for that. So for our red layer, we're not going for a super vibrant red. We almost want kind of like a pinkish red. So I'm just going to add a little bit here and we'll see what color we get. So again, stirring this all the way to the bottom, getting that food coloring evenly distributed. Got a pretty pink color. So I've cut out some parchment rounds to line my 7-inch cake pans, and I've sprayed them with just a little bit of nonstick cooking spray. And now it's time to get our batter into our bowls. All right, so our batters are all ready to go now. So I'm going to pop these into our preheated oven and bake them for about 25 to 30 minutes or until a toothpick comes out clean. I have a mini oven, so I get a lot of browning on the sides of my cake layers. You can avoid this by using some baking strips, which help prevent the browning, or you can trim the sides using a serrated knife like I'm doing here. I'm also leveling my layers just by spinning the cake rounds and carefully taking off the tops. So next I'm going to add a thin layer of my almond buttercream on top of this cake layer, and then we're going to top it with some of that raspberry jam. So we don't need a lot of frosting here, just a little bit. So next we're going to pipe a border around our cake here, and this is going to help keep that raspberry jam in place. You don't want too much here because if you do add a ton, you'll get a lot of slippage between your cake layers, and that can make it a lot harder to stack your cake. But you do want enough to be able to get a thin layer so that every bite has that delicious raspberry taste. So next we're going to add on our yellow cake layer, and then we're going to repeat this process. So again, adding about 3 tablespoons full. I'll work that around right to the edge of that frosting dam. And then we'll top it with our final cake layer. So now that our cake layers are stacked, I'm going to apply a thin crumb coat around the cake just to lock in all those colorful crumbs and help this cake set before we cover it in ganache. So I'm just piping a bit. I'm not covering the entire cake here because we don't need a really thick coating. We just want to thinly cover all those cake layers. So we'll work that around gently, and we're going to not apply a lot of pressure here because with all that raspberry jam between the cake layers, if you push really hard, you're going to get a ton of sliding. As you can see, I'm already having a little bit of it. So just be really light with your touch on this and just work with the frosting. So now that we've covered it, it's time to use our bench scraper just to smooth it out, get a really clean finish. If you want to do a quick check to make sure your layers haven't slid or gotten off center, you can always just use your bench scraper. Make sure that they're nice and level. So mine look pretty good, so I'm just going to keep smoothing. So now I'm just going to drag those top edges into the center. And again, I'm scraping off my excess as I do this, so that way each time I go back for a pass, my bench scraper is nice and clean. If you don't do that, you can end up adding more frosting to the top than you intend to, and that can lead to uneven sides or a lopsided top, and that is not what we're after. So now that our cake is crumb coated, I'm going to pop it into my freezer for about 5 minutes until that crumb coat is firm to the touch. So I just peeled the saran wrap off of my ganache, and you can see that it's firm enough that the saran wrap left lines. So your ganache should be really nice and smooth at this point. As you can see, it just has an amazing texture. This is just going to be the perfect coating on this cake to emulate the chocolate that is on the top and bottom of a rainbow cookie. Alright, so our cake is nice and chilled. Now it's time to add that ganache onto our cake. So we're just going to spread it around starting on the top, and we're going to work it down the sides. Once the cake is covered, we're going to carve a very fun pattern into it. Perfect. So now that our sides are really nice and smooth, I'm going to do one last just pull into the center. Alright, so those are some beautifully sharp corners. I'm going to clean up the base with the bottom of my bench scraper here. So to create some texture on this cake, I'm using this Wilton frosting comb. And I'm using a side that has all equally sized teeth. And this is just going to help give me some uniform lines around the cake. Now that our cake is ganached, I'm going to use my frosting comb just to create some lines around this, just like an Italian rainbow cookie. As you do this, you just want to keep the frosting comb flat against your cake board so you're going in the same lines as you do. If after you run the comb around the cake you get some texture, if your ganache has set and is firm to the touch, you can actually just brush off those little bits. You're not going to apply any pressure here, really lightly brushing, but it'll help give you a clean finished look, and we'll get rid of all of those little bits that are kind of stuck in between your lines. Right, so now we're going to do it to the top of the cake as well. So next it's time to cut my rainbow cookies into hearts. I'm now going to use my heart cutter just to cut out some little hearts. So as you're doing this, feel free to clean your cookie cutter as much as needed because you're going to probably get some chocolate in there, and you want it to stay nice and clean so you can get clean cuts. Now that our cake is decorated, it's time to add those fun little rainbow cookie hearts onto our cake. So I'm going to start by adding just a little dab of ganache here to help them stick. And then I'm going to place my heart right along the base, just like that. So I'm going to repeat this process all the way around the cake. And our last little heart just barely fits in there. Now there's nothing left to do but cut into this cake. I really can't wait to see those colorful cake layers and to taste that raspberry almond flavor. I am super excited for this. So you guys can see we've got our beautiful rainbow cookie inspired almond cake layers, that almond buttercream, and of course some raspberry jam between each layer. So as you guys can see, it really looks just like an Italian rainbow cookie. I mean, look at that slice. It is so beautiful. I really love this cake because the outside with the chocolate is almost understated. It seems really simple, but then as soon as you cut in, you have that bright pop of color and you just know it's going to be delicious. So now I'm going to do my taste test, but before I do, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, be sure to click that like button, and also let me know what other tutorials or cake flavors you'd like to see. Hopefully, I'll see you guys again soon.